He was wrong about all three things. Wrong about the timepiece being worthless, wrong about me not understanding Mandarin, and most importantly, wrong about thinking I'd forgotten what respect means. My son-in-law, Jonathan, had no idea that his smirk across the Christmas dinner table had just set something in motion he wasn't prepared for. Let me back up. My name is William Lau, though most people in our Toronto neighborhood just call me Bill. I'm 67 years old, and for the past 20 years, I've made my living as a property manager. A simple life, fixing things that break. But on Christmas Eve, my son-in-law, Jonathan, made a mistake that couldn't be fixed with a wrench. He spoke to me in a language he thought I didn't understand. You know the type. I fix leaky faucets, unclog drains, handle tenant complaints. It's honest work. Work that keeps my hands busy and pays the bills, since my wife Grace passed away 8 years ago. My daughter Emily is my whole world. Always has been. She's a nurse at Toronto General Hospital, works the emergency department, strong, compassionate, exactly like her mother. 2 years ago, she married Jonathan Kwok, a corporate lawyer with one of those downtown firms that occupies the top 10 floors of a glass tower. I'll be honest, I had reservations from the start, not because Jonathan wasn't successful, or because he came from money, but because of the way he looked at people like me, service workers, blue-collar folks. It was that particular combination of pity and dismissal that people often mistake for politeness. Did you ever feel that? The instant measure-up? The quiet calculation of your worth based on your calloused hands or the cut of your suit? That look felt like a cold draft in the warmth of my family. But Emily loved him. And when your daughter, your whole world, finally finds that light, you learn to swallow the cold draft. You learn to smile through it, because her happiness, and nothing else, is what mattered. The timepiece incident happened on Christmas Eve 2023. Emily and Jonathan were hosting dinner at their Yorkville penthouse, the kind of place that felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on wealth. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, windows that seemed to look down, literally and figuratively, on the city where I fixed the things that broke. This was a place where the air felt thinner, the silence more expensive, and where the monthly maintenance fees probably equaled my entire mortgage. It was a visual juxtaposition, my practical, honest life below, their glittering, untouchable world above, and I was the bridge trying to hold the two together. I'd brought a gift for Jonathan, something I'd been holding on to for nearly 40 years. The dinner party was small. Emily and Jonathan, Jonathan's parents, Henry and Vivian, who owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, his younger sister Stephanie, a dentist, and Stephanie's fiancé Kevin, something in tech I could never keep track of. The penthouse was decorated like something ripped straight from a glossy magazine. Everything was white and silver and crystal. Even the Christmas tree looked expensive, like each ornament had been individually curated. The sheer effort of being that perfect, that flawless, felt exhausting. I stood there, a patch of honest wool in a sea of polished silk. I felt out of place the moment I walked in, wearing my good sweater, the one Grace had bought me years ago. It was a memory anchor, that sweater. It smelled like her gentle, quiet life. But here, in this crystalline tower, it felt like a declaration of the humble life they thought they'd risen above. The discomfort was immediate. The call to adventure into this new world was answered with a silent, sinking heart. Jonathan greeted me with that professional handshake he'd perfected, the kind that's firm enough to seem sincere, but doesn't actually convey any warmth. "Bill, great to see you. Here, let me take your coat." Emily hugged me properly, the way daughters do. "Dad, I'm so glad you're here. Come on, everyone's in the living room." Henry was holding court near the fireplace, telling some story about a Tesla buyer who'd tried to negotiate the price. Vivian stood beside him, laughing at the appropriate moments, holding a glass of white wine that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. "Bill." Henry's voice boomed. The man who keeps Toronto running. How's the property manager business? There it was, that tone, jovial on the surface, but with that underlying current that made property manager sound like a punchline. Steady, I replied. Always something breaking somewhere. I bet. He clapped me on the shoulder. Thank God for people like you. Society needs folks willing to do the jobs nobody else wants. I felt Emily tense beside me. She knew. She always knew. Dinner was elaborate. Jonathan had hired a catering company, some kind of fusion cuisine that looked beautiful but left me wondering where the actual meal was. The conversations flowed around me. Tech stocks, real estate markets, vacation properties, and Blue Mountain. I nodded along, contributed when I could, but mostly I just watched Emily. Watched how she navigated between two worlds, how tired she looked. After dessert, some deconstructed cheesecake thing, Emily suggested we exchange gifts. That's when I pulled out the small wrapped box I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket. Jonathan, I said, handing it to him. This is for you. It's not much, but I thought you might appreciate it. Emily's eyes lit up. She knew what it was. I told her about it years ago. Jonathan took the box with that polite smile people use when they're already preparing to fake enthusiasm. The room went quiet as everyone watched him unwrap it. Inside was a timepiece, a simple gold-plated watch ticking with the rhythm of 60 years of honest work. Not just any timepiece, a 1958 Longines flagship heritage, gold-plated case, cream dial, leather strap I'd recently had replaced. It had belonged to my father, who'd received it as a retirement gift after 30 years working as a dock supervisor at the port of Halifax. This wasn't a watch. It was a physical copy of my family's entire legacy. Your turn to build something that lasts, he'd said to me on my wedding day when he gave it to me. I'd worn it every day for 20 years until Grace died. After that, I couldn't look at it without breaking. It became a symbol of dual grief. The grief of losing her, and the grief of putting away a life well lived, a life marked by that ticking sound. But watching Emily try so hard to bridge the gap between her world and Jonathan's, I thought maybe it was time for the timepiece to mean something new, a way of welcoming Jonathan into our family properly, a symbol that said, "You're one of us now." I was extending the legacy, a gesture of radical hope. Jonathan held the timepiece up to the light, turning it over in his fingers. The room was silent. Then he said something in Mandarin, quick, under his breath, but clear enough. Cheap garbage. The old man thinks this will impress me. His mother, Vivian, let out a small laugh. She'd understood. So had his father, Henry, who smirked into his wine glass. They thought I didn't speak Mandarin. Why would I? The Chinese property manager, who anglicized his surname to Lao, who spoke English with that particular Toronto cadence. They'd made their assumptions. They were wrong. My father was from Fujian, my mother from Beijing. I grew up bilingual, though I'll admit my Mandarin got rusty over the years. But you don't forget your mother tongue. Not really. I sat there watching Jonathan set the timepiece down on the coffee table like it was something he'd need to dispose of later. But my eyes were on Emily. Watching her face fall, watching her register his lack of enthusiasm, then watching Henry and Vivian exchange that knowing look that said, "See, we told you his family was beneath us." It was more than an insult to me. It was a rejection of her. My daughter, caught between their world of glass and my world of grit, watching her father's love dismissed as cheap sentimentality. The truth hit me. They weren't just insulting my past. They were diminishing my daughter's present. The question, sharp and cold, was no longer about the watch, but about her dignity. How long was I going to let this continue? That moment demanded a transformative response, not a temporary defense. I could have said something right then. Could have responded in perfect Mandarin. Let him know I'd understood every word. Could have made it ugly and immediate. But I looked at Emily at the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she was holding herself together for this dinner party. This wasn't the moment. Not for her sake. So I smiled. I nodded. I accepted Jonathan's cold thanks, and I started planning. Sometimes the longest silence holds the loudest answer. If you believe there's dignity in all honest work and a story worth telling in every life, please take a moment to subscribe. I need you to be here to see how this plan unfolds. Over the next 2 years, I watched. I waited. I learned everything I could about Jonathan Kwok. I learned that he collected timepieces, expensive ones, IWC, Vacheron Constantin, Jaeger LeCoultre, status symbols he wore to court, to client dinners, to prove something to someone. It was a fragile armor of wealth, and I found the chink in it. He knew nothing about vintage timepieces beyond their current market value. He was exactly the kind of collector that serious horologists quietly mocked. He was a tourist in a world he thought he owned. And I learned, with a quiet, satisfying certainty, that my father's timepiece, the cheap garbage, was actually worth considerably more than Jonathan's entire collection combined. The quiet dignity of my family's legacy was, in fact, an absolute financial shock to his inflated ego. You see, I'd had it appraised years ago, right after Grace died, just curious about insurance, you understand? The appraiser had gotten very quiet when he examined it, had made some phone calls, had asked if he could take photographs. Turned out my father's retirement timepiece wasn't just any Longines flagship heritage. It was a rare transitional model from 1959, one of only a few hundred made before they changed the design. The reference number, the original dial condition, the fact that it still had the original box and papers that my father had carefully preserved. All of it meant something to collectors. The appraiser's estimate was somewhere between $140,000 and $190,000 Canadian dollars. I'd nearly fallen over, but I hadn't sold it. I couldn't. It was my father's legacy, my connection to him, to Grace, to the life we'd built together. The money didn't matter. It was a memory anchor to a whole life, a whole love. But when Jonathan, in his ignorance, called it garbage, that's when the money suddenly mattered very much. Not because I needed the money, but because the price tag was the only language he truly respected. It was the only weapon that could shatter his condescending view of my life. I didn't tell Emily what I'd heard at that Christmas dinner. Didn't want to poison her marriage with my hurt feelings. She was happy, or at least she was trying to be. Who was I to interfere? But I started attending estate sales, started learning about timepieces properly, made friends with collectors, auction house specialists, horologists. I wanted to understand this world that Jonathan pretended to inhabit. Turns out collecting timepieces is like any other pursuit. There are people who do it for love and people who do it for show. Jonathan was definitely the latter. He could quote prices and brands, but he couldn't tell you about movements or complications or the history that made certain pieces special. He was exactly the kind of collector that serious horologists quietly mocked. 2 years passed. Emily stayed busy with her demanding work at the emergency department. Jonathan stayed busy with his career, his collections, his world that had no real room for me. And I stayed busy with my buildings, my tenants, and my new hobby of actually understanding the thing Jonathan had dismissed. Then, in October 2026, Emily called me. She mentioned that Jonathan's firm just made him junior partner, and they were celebrating. A celebration of elevation, perhaps a celebration of their perceived superiority. The dinner was set for early November. That's when I decided 2 years was long enough. The silence had ended. It was time for a little education. The time for patience had passed. The call to action had arrived. I spent 2 weeks making arrangements, called in some favors, made some expensive decisions, but by the night of the party, everything was in place. I had the documentation, the expert opinion, and the timing down to the second. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to use his own world, the world of valuation and status, to deliver the most important lesson of his life. The dinner party was even more elaborate than the Christmas gathering 2 years prior. The penthouse was full, maybe 20 people, all dressed in what I'd learned to recognize as Toronto business formal. The men in suits that cost more than my monthly rent. The women in designer dresses and jewelry that caught the light. I arrived on time, dressed in my one good suit. Emily hugged me at the door, whispering, "Thank you for coming, Dad." Jonathan was already holding court in the living room, drink in hand, laughing with a silver-haired man I recognized from the news, Edward Sinclair, managing partner at Jonathan's firm. "Bill." Jonathan's voice carried across the room. "Everyone, this is my father-in-law, Bill Lau. He keeps the city running, literally. He's a property manager." There was polite laughter, that particular kind that's not really about humor, but about acknowledging someone's place in the social hierarchy. I shook hands, made small talk, let the evening flow around me. Dinner was catered again, even more elaborate this time. 6 courses, each announced like it was a work of art. Wine pairings that Jonathan explained with the kind of detail that suggested he'd memorized a sommelier script. During the main course, some kind of duck preparation, and Jonathan started talking about his timepiece collection, showing off the new Vacheron Constantin on his wrist to Edward Sinclair. $22,000. He was saying annual calendar moon phase. You can't find these easily. Beautiful piece. Edward agreed. I've got a similar model myself. That's when Jonathan's father, Henry, chimed in. Jonathan has quite the eye for quality. Been collecting since law school. I cut into my duck, said nothing. "Bill," Vivian's voice carried down the table. "Do you still have that old timepiece you gave Jonathan a few years ago? The sentimental one." The table went quiet. Emily's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Jonathan actually laughed. "Oh, that thing. Yeah, it's around somewhere. Sweet gesture, though." I set down my fork, the sound surprisingly loud in the tense silence, looked up, and met Jonathan's eyes. I held the gaze, the look of the man who fixes toilets meeting the man who buys glass towers. "Actually," I said quietly, my voice calm enough to be terrifying, "I was wondering if you still had it." Something in my tone made the entire table, filled with Toronto's elite, go absolutely silent. Jonathan's polite smile flickered. "Sure, I think so. Why?" I reached into my jacket pocket, that old familiar good suit, and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the table next to my plate. "Because," I said, still in English, "I had it authenticated professionally. Would you mind bringing it out? I think everyone here might find it interesting." It was the opening gambit, the moment the humble property manager demanded the attention of the corporate lawyer. The game had truly begun. Jonathan's face went through several expressions. Confusion, annoyance, then something that might have been concern. "Bill, I don't think this is really the time." "Laoban, boss," I said, switching to Mandarin, watching his face go pale. "I think this is exactly the time, don't you?" The Mandarin word laoban, which can mean boss or person in charge, hung in the air. His parents had gone rigid in their seats. Emily was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Dad, you speak Mandarin?" I said to her in Mandarin, then switched back to English. "Your husband doesn't know many things. For instance, he doesn't know that I understood him perfectly 2 years ago when he called my father's timepiece cheap garbage at Christmas dinner." Vivian dropped her wine glass. It shattered against her plate. Jonathan had gone white. "Bill, please," I said politely, "bring out the timepiece. I think Mr. Sinclair here might appreciate seeing it. He collects vintage Longines, don't you, sir?" Edward Sinclair was leaning forward now, interested. "I do, actually. What model are we talking about?" A 1959 Longines flagship heritage, I said. Transitional model, original dial, original papers. Edward's eyebrows shot up. If that's authentic, I know what it's worth, I said softly. That's why I brought documentation. The room had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Jonathan, who looked like he might be sick. I'll get it, Emily said suddenly, standing. Her voice was shaking. I know where it is. She disappeared into the bedroom. The silence stretched. Jonathan stared at his plate. His parents looked at each other with barely concealed panic. Emily returned, holding a small wooden box, the original Longines box my father had kept. She set it in front of me. I opened it slowly. The timepiece gleamed under the dining room lights, exactly as I remembered it. I'd maintained it carefully over the years, kept it serviced. It still ran perfectly. May I? Edward reached out, and I nodded. He picked up the timepiece with careful hands, turning it over, examining the case back, the dial, the crown. His expression shifted from interest to astonishment. Good God, he whispered. This is genuine. The reference number. This is a 2009-42-3, the transitional model before they went to the 2009-20 case. He looked up at me. Mr. Lau, do you have the papers? I handed him the envelope. Inside was the original warranty card, the receipt from 1959, and the modern appraisal from Phillips that I'd commissioned 2 weeks ago. Edward read the appraisal, blinked, read it again. Jonathan, he said quietly, did you know this timepiece is worth approximately $175,000? You could have heard a pin drop. Stephanie was staring at her brother. Kevin had his phone out, clearly looking up the reference number to verify. Henry and Vivian looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Emily was looking at me with tears in her eyes. Jonathan had his head in his hands. Son-in-law, I said softly in Mandarin, the word hanging like a threat, then switched to English. 2 years ago, I gave you this timepiece as a gift, a family heirloom. My father wore it for 30 years. I wore it for 20 more. It represented 67 years of honest work, 67 years of building something that lasts. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. You called it garbage in Mandarin because you thought I wouldn't understand, because you assumed that someone who fixes toilets for a living couldn't possibly know anything valuable, couldn't possibly speak your language, couldn't possibly be worth your respect. This was the core of the dual grief, the grief of the insult to my father's legacy, layered with the heartbreak of being rejected by my daughter's husband. It was the moment I reclaimed my dignity, using his own arrogant assumption against him. Jonathan's face was buried in his hands now. His shoulders were shaking. You were wrong, I continued, about the timepiece, about me, about what makes something or someone valuable. The room was frozen. That day, a corporate lawyer learned that true value isn't a price tag. It's the weight of a legacy. If you know someone who needs to hear that lesson, who needs a reminder that respect is earned, not bought, then please share this story with them. The lesson doesn't stop here. Emily had tears running down her face. But here's the thing, I said, and my voice gentled. I'm not here to humiliate you, Jonathan. I'm here to teach you something my father taught me. I reached over and carefully took the timepiece from Edward's hands, held it up so everyone could see it. This timepiece isn't valuable because of what it's worth in dollars. It's valuable because of what it represents. The years, the work, the hands that wore it, the moments it witnessed. My father's retirement, my wedding, the birth of my daughter. 67 years of a life well lived. I looked directly at Jonathan, who finally raised his head to meet my eyes. That's what you dismissed. Not cheap garbage. A legacy? The silence was absolute. Then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I set the timepiece down in front of Jonathan. I'm giving it to you, I said. Again, for real this time. Emily made a small sound. Jonathan looked stunned. But I continued on one condition. Anything, Jonathan whispered. You learn what it means, not the price, the meaning. You learn about your heritage, the language your parents speak, the culture you use as a weapon instead of a gift. You learn about the work that built this family, and you learn that respect isn't about what someone does for a living. It's about recognizing the dignity in all honest work. I pulled out a business card from my pocket, handed it to him. This is a friend of mine, Michael Cheung. He's a horologist here in Toronto, and he teaches courses on timepiece collecting, history, and restoration. I've already paid for a year of lessons for you. Every Saturday morning, you'll learn about movements, complications, brand histories, but more importantly, you'll learn patience, attention to detail, respect for craftsmanship. Jonathan was crying now, full-on crying in front of his colleagues, his family, everyone. I'm also, I continued, going to teach you Mandarin properly, not the Mandarin you use to talk around people. Real Mandarin. We'll meet every Sunday. I'll teach you what my parents taught me, the idioms, the culture, the history. You want to connect to your heritage? Let's connect. Emily was beside me now, her hand on my shoulder, tears streaming down her face. And finally, I said, you're going to spend one Saturday a month working with me in the buildings, fixing toilets, unclogging drains, painting walls, meeting the people who live there, immigrants, students, families, seniors. You're going to learn what I learned, that every person has value, every job has dignity, and that the measure of a man isn't what he owns, it's what he does with what he's been given. Jonathan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping back. For a moment, I thought he might leave, might storm out. Instead, he came around the table and stood in front of me. Then he bowed, a proper Chinese bow from the waist, the kind you give an elder you've disrespected. Duibuki. I'm sorry, he said in Mandarin. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I stood and helped him straighten up, put my hands on his shoulders. I said, we all make mistakes. What matters is how we correct them. He nodded, unable to speak. The dinner party dissolved after that. People drifted into quiet conversations. Edward Sinclair came over and shook my hand, told me he'd love to hear more about my father's career at the port of Halifax. Stephanie apologized for her family's rudeness. Even Henry and Vivian approached shamefaced and offered halting apologies in English. Later, after everyone had left, it was just Emily, Jonathan, and me standing in the kitchen while Emily made tea. Why? Jonathan asked quietly. Why give me the timepiece after I treated you so badly? I thought about that for a moment. Because that's what family does, I said finally. We correct each other. We teach each other. We give each other chances to be better. I looked at the timepiece on the counter between us. And because that timepiece means nothing sitting in a box, I said, it means something when it's worn by someone who understands what it represents, someone who's earned the right to carry that legacy forward. I picked it up and, with gentle finality, fastened it around Jonathan's wrist. Earn it, I said simply. He nodded, staring down at the timepiece on his wrist like it was the most precious thing he'd ever held. The weight of 67 years of honest work was now on his skin, a new memory anchor for a life that was just beginning to change. The transformative value had been delivered. That was a year ago. And in the quiet ticking of a 1959 Longines, I hear not just time, but the resonant echo of a profound psychological shift. This story isn't just about a valuable watch. It's a clinical study on the fragile architecture of ego and the restorative power of true connection. Jonathan's dismissal of the timepiece as cheap garbage was a classic defense mechanism, a desperate attempt to assert superiority over a life he unconsciously feared, one of honest, manual labor. The gift was a mirror, and he hated the reflection. But Bill, or William Lau, the property manager, understood the deeper conflict. He didn't seek revenge, he initiated therapy. His prescribed curriculum, the Saturday lessons with the horologist, the Sunday Mandarin sessions, and most crucially, the monthly work-fixing tenants' toilets and sinks, was a meticulously crafted exposure therapy. It forced Jonathan to dismantle his perceived hierarchy and confront the dignity inherent in what he had once dismissed. Look at the photo album. The image of Jonathan, the corporate lawyer, next to Bill's father, the dock supervisor. Both men wear the same watch, carrying the same weight of the years, the dignity of work, the love of family. The word chuancheng, legacy, is the diagnosis and the cure. My deepest plea to you, the reader, is this. Don't wait for a crisis to check the true value of the people around you. Do not let assumptions about a title, a salary, or a designer suit blind you to the richness of the story held in someone's hands. The clock of life is always running, and every moment is an opportunity to recognize and honor the dignity in every person you meet. Today, seek out a connection with someone different from you and ask them their story. That is how you begin building something that truly lasts.